I did. Yeah, it's down.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're good. We're good to go. Getting ready to go Zoom as well as Facebook Live. So right now we're international live, and we are Facebook Live. Good morning, everybody. It's a great morning on a Friday at 11 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. Here with 360 Performance, and my guest Jim Davidson. Will be introducing Jim formally in just a moment, but I want to make sure that as we do every week, we start off the show with sharing a little gratitude. And I tell you what, I am grateful that I'm safe. I don't have any broken bones. My surgery is healing nicely, and I've never faced an avalanche and an earthquake all at the same time. But some people I know have, and we're going to talk to that person here in a few minutes, and also talk about his new book, The Next Everest. It's a marvelous, not only a marvelous title once you get reading into the book and you understand exactly what that title means, because I think everybody may have their next Everest waiting for them, or they've already experienced their next Everest. And we're going to talk about that with our guest today. But before I get to that, I'm going to just share a couple of things about what's going on in the world as we know it. Some of it's sports related, some of it business related. I just want to reach out to people out there and say, look, I feel for you. When you thought that the COVID situation was improving, it has. There's no denying that. But there are still some people that aren't quite grasping the science. And I reach out to my cousin Lori in Sedalia, Missouri, where she is an executive with the Bothell Regional Health Systems. They are now becoming, it's an escalated situation in her area. And her hospital is now uncovering the beds that they thought they put away for all those COVID patients that are coming to them. A majority of those patients, both there as well as around the country, are there because they are not vaccinated. That is a scientific fact. I hope that's a motivating fact for a lot of other people. In addition to that, I want to also talk about a positive. My friend and NFL veteran, Shaq Barrett, congratulations on the addition to his family. Not a brand new daughter. I mean, she's new enough. She's an infant, but to him and his family on their new addition. The two boys have a new sister. Their sister has a new sister. So congratulations to them with what they're doing. So that being said, welcome everybody. Jim Davidson to our studio today here at KUHS Denver, streaming worldwide. So hopefully those Sherpas who have radios or smartphones are tuning in to listen to Jim talk about his experience on the mountain as a climber. Welcome, Jim. I'm glad to have you here.
Thanks, Les. Great to be with you.
Now, I'm going to guess, but I'm going to be surprised at what you may be grateful for, but I think you're going to be grateful for just being in that chair you're sitting in and talking to me today after your experience on Everest. But what are you grateful for today?
I'm grateful that my family and my neighbors are healthy after this difficult year, and we've got the potential to kind of work our way out of this COVID situation. We're not out of the woods yet, like you said, but if everybody keeps doing what they need to do, I'm grateful that science has provided an exit to what could have been a really bad situation for a really long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sets me up with my first question for you, in addition to what you're grateful for. My mindset moment this week, I have a quote I give every week on Mondays, and the quote was, when times get tough, we don't give up, we get up. And that's Barack Obama said that. So when you're climbing, Jim, where do you go to get up? Because you got enough environmental stimulus to bring you down or push you down. What do you draw upon to get you going again?
Yeah, I think it's a great quote, because when you're on a mountain, there's always something a little uncertain, a little oppressive coming at you. And if you're looking for that first reason to bail out, that first tough thing to go, well, that's it, we should quit, that's what'll happen. And sometimes that's the right move. But lots of times you're just going to have to get up and try harder. Say, okay, if the storm's coming in, we have to climb faster. It's raining and we're out of food. Well, looks like we walk out wet and hungry.
Yeah.
That's not going to kill us. It's not going to make it fun, but it's not going to kill us. And so when something comes at you, you got to find it within yourself and within your team to rise up against it. And depending on the situation, maybe it comes from one team member or the other. So look inside yourself to find that reason to get up and go, even though things are tough. And if you can't find it here, lean on one of your team members. And that's a big part of being resilient, is taking turns lifting each other up.
Now, Jim, one of the things that interests me, in addition to the fact that your love for climbing is just there's no question. I mean, you keep going back. You keep taking on the next challenge. And many times those challenges aren't the mountain and the environment itself. It's the conversation you want to start with your loved ones about, excuse me, could I go climbing again? Is it okay with you guys if I go for a while and go climbing again? Why do you keep doing this?
Well, I've been a climber for 39 years, and I've been, I've done alpine, ice and rock for many decades, and I've been doing the high altitude expeditioning thing for, nearly 20 years. It just calls to me, and it doesn't make sense in lots of ways. And some people think climbers will say, they think climbers are risk takers or daredevils. Not at all. We spend most of our time managing and reducing risk. As far as my personal judgment on risk, I never smoke cigarettes, I never drive a car without my seatbelt, I never ride a bicycle without a helmet. I'm a pretty risk-averse guy, but I go ice climbing and climb high mountains. That doesn't quite add up, and I think the key component is passion, which is if you have a passion for something and it calls to you, it doesn't matter whether it pays you, it doesn't matter whether it's easy or you're going to have to give up other things, you want to pursue that passion. And for some people it's music or marathons or meditation. For me, it's the mountains. And so by going to the mountains, it nourishes my soul, it makes my body stronger, and I think it makes me hopefully a better family member, a better community member as well.
Now, one of my authors that I follow a lot, because he is, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, wrote a book called Flow, and that has evolved into the flow state. Steve Kaler writes about it. He's a journalist, and he writes about the people like yourself that initially people would perceive you as a risk taker. But there's also those people that wear their Rocky the Squirrel outfits and jump off cliffs. There's those parasailers. There are those skiers that ski in ultimate settings and push the limits. And they jump the crevices that you don't want to even get near. But they do it, and they get into this flow state. So give me the details of your passion, Jim. What are the elements of that passion? Is it the feel of the ice, the altitude desperation of breath that you experience? What are some of those specific elements that define your passion?
There's a couple. The first one is you are close to nature. You are literally touching the rock with your hands, standing on the ice with your feet, and breathing in the wet vapors coming out of the evaporating snow. So you are immediately in touch with nature and surrounded by it. On a small scale, if you're in a small little gully, you've got the rock walls on both sides. If you're on a big exposed ridge, you've got a view 100 miles in every direction. You can see mountains and trees and valleys. So being in touch with nature and surrounded by it is a big part of it for sure. And the other part is moving through it. You've probably heard it said sometimes, but I'd say climbing is like moving meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Moving through this environment, it feels meditative to me. My mind gets clear. I'm very present. I'm getting physical rewards of the sensation of nature and the benefits of exercise. I'm getting the mental clearing out from the focus I've got to do the climbing I have to do. So to me, it clears my mind, it clears my body, makes me stronger, and I'm really living in that moment. And that's the flow moments for me when I'm out climbing.
So Jim, you mentioned those elements, and are truly relatable for me as I look at all the sports that I investigate and support in my coaching, my mental performance coaching. But then there's the people. And now you don't necessarily you have a team, but you don't have a team. Because in those literally blinded moments, you have just you. Even though you're tethered to a rope that's connected to somebody else, you have those moments where it's just you. So where does the team and those elements, I mean, we're going to talk about the book in a minute and some of those interactions you have with your teammates during those special moments on Everest. Oh my God, there were the first few chapters just kind of grabbed me and just pulled me in. So tell me a little bit about those flow moments with the people and the connection with the people in the team.
Yeah, the team serves multiple purposes. First of all, they're your companions experiencing this with you. Second of all, they're a safety net. If you get sick or injured, these are the folks that are going to take care of you. And then it also becomes a responsibility, which is you have your reciprocal responsibilities to them. If they get sick and injured, I'm not leaving them on the mountain. I'm not going home until I know they have a way to get home. We are together in this 100%. And there's a lot of power in that. The camaraderie is very, very powerful, as everybody knows who's played team sports, either an amateur level or a serious level. And the other thing is, when I'm at the far end of the rope, let's say I'm leading an ice section, and my partner is 150 feet below me and around the corner. I cannot see them, but when I move up 6 inches or a foot, the rope pays out 6 inches or a foot. And that reminds me they're back there. And I have a responsibility to try and get us up that section of ice, to secure the rope as best I can and bring my partners up when it's their turn. And even though I may be scared to go, man, if I was on my own, I'd go down right now. But they're back there counting on me. I've got to get through this tough section, then maybe I'll get a break and I'll catch my breath, and they will take the front, or as we say, take the lead. So it becomes a backup, a companionship, and also a motivating factor to give it your best no matter what. Whether I'm scared, whether the conditions are difficult or not, I've got to give it my best because they're counting on me.
Now, with that thought, Jim, let's segue into the book, because there was some thinking going on in those first few moments at base camp on your quest to get to the summit of Everest that were a little dicey and questioned you about whether you even get a chance to go for the top. And I'm referring to those whiteout moments where ice and snow, and ice wasn't very small, it was fairly substantial pieces of ice, and you and your partner decided to stay in the tent for the moments that you were kind of vacillating and ice, and up and down. I considered that mogul skiing when you described it in the book. And I was going back to watching my mogul freestyle skiers, and yet you're in a tent. You're not hooked to skis. And I also reflected on, the guy doesn't have any boots on, and he's outside, trying to figure out what's going on. So you progress from that moment to finding the doctor that's part of your team. And as you look into her face, was there a concern that here's this medical professional, you're looking at her face and asking her the question, okay, how is everybody? And you're not necessarily getting back an expression that gives you a lot of solace or a lot of confidence, because your information, you didn't have a lot. It was just nature screaming at you.
Yeah, to put it in context, a couple things there. So I was on Everest in April of 25th of 2015 when the earthquake hit. It was a 7.8 magnitude earthquake, like you're talking about. And that brought down huge avalanches, 4,000 vertical feet on one wall towards our tent, 6,000 vertical feet down the other wall towards our tent. And when the avalanche was coming, my partner and I knew we had to get out of the tent because we don't want to be in there when the avalanche debris shows up, because the tent will act like a sail or a sea anchor and drag us under. So that's why we ran outside to be able to see the avalanches, hopefully, and maybe have a chance to swim on top of the approaching debris. And in that rush to get out of the tent, I didn't even have time to put my shoes on. So that's why I was standing on the glacier without my boots on. I did have my avalanche beacon on in case I got buried. And we had, 5 or 6 moments of utter terror and confusion. The ground is going beneath us like waves. It's like earthquake waves were rippling through the glacier that we were standing on. So all that was happening was just totally new sensations every 10 seconds that you've never experienced before. And when things calmed down, I got a chance to talk to our team leader, who was also a doctor. She didn't have all the answers yet. I looked at the leader, I said, is everybody okay? And she didn't know yet. So fortunately, she gave me an honest answer. She said, I don't know, we're checking. And she got on the radio, and I heard on the radio. But even in that moment, she displayed great leadership because she was calm, she was honest, she was realistic. She said, I know it's really scary, but optimistic. We've got really smart people, hang on, we'll figure this out. So there's a lot of things happening in a moment of crisis like that, with an earthquake and avalanche coming. And it does kind of chop your flow state up. You kind of have to go back to the basics. Take care of myself by putting my avalanche beacon on, check on my teammates to see if they're okay, and then realize that we're not going to have all the answers we want. It's going to take a while for these answers to trickle in over the radio and through our observations. So the flow can get a little choppy, and it can get unsettling when that happens.
Jim, what's more challenging? The moments in the moment, with the snow and the ice and the wind blowing around you and the ground vacillating underneath you, or the silence in those pauses in between the unknowns? Are there going to be aftershocks? Where's my family at? What are they thinking? Because you had communication devices with you that allowed you to connect and let them know. Which moments are worse?
They're worse in different ways. The moments of earthquakes and avalanches and rushing out of the tent and putting on avalanche beacons and diving back in the tent we couldn't breathe, those are scary from a physical perspective. If I don't make the right decision, I could die or somebody else could die. So you've got to try and cut through the fear just you can't make the fear go away, but you just compartmentalize it. You push it aside and say, I've got to put my avalanche beacon on, I've got to check on my teammates, I've got to put warmer clothing on. So they are very fearful from a physical standpoint, but you need to brush aside the psychological things. And then it flips around the other way during the quiet moments, like you point out, which is I'm laying in my tent, the avalanches have subsided for now, but I'm a trained environmental geologist with decades of experience, so I knew there were going to be aftershocks and avalanches coming again. And so I'm laying there in the quiet moments, thinking about my family, thinking about the fact that earthquakes and avalanches are going to return with 100% certainty. That's when it's more psychologically oppressive. I wasn't having physical danger, I was laying in a sleeping bag, but I had to think about all that stuff. So you kind of have to, in the moment of the physical stuff, put the fear aside, and when the emotional stuff rolls up later, you kind of have to wade through that too. It's often the emotional difficulties and the fears and uncertainties that are hardest to deal with.
So you're not alone in those moments. You're in the tent with your partner that's there with you, your climbing partner, one of many climbing partners, but he's your tent mate, if you will, and he has his emotional responses, his nonverbal emotional responses, as well as the physical responses to that. So you're digesting you and taking care of you first, and then you have those quiet time where now you're with him back in the tent. What do you do how do you compartmentalize? And a psychologist would say, okay, compartmentalize the emotional moments, but a psychologist isn't in that situation with you with a rush of all these different compartments, these buckets that you have to kind of put in perspective. And now that you've got you under control, you look across the tent, you go, uh-oh, I forgot about him and his expressions and his emotional responses. Which ones do you deal with, as you compartmentalize? I mean, it's just going to keep rushing back. I mean, that's an amazing incident of emotional cascades.
Yes, I like your word bucket, and I like your word cascade, because I just had in my mind several buckets here. I've got my personal resilience and calmness bucket, and there's my tent mate's bucket, and if I let mine overflow, it could overflow his. And if he and I are overflowing at the same time, it could wash over to our other tent mates, and then to the whole team, and now the leader's got 15 screaming, crying people. So that's not good. So you have to try and focus on your own personal resilience first. I've got to stay calm, even though I'm terrified. Oh, I need to check on my friend Bart to see how he's doing, and maybe he's worse than me, and I'll have to lift him up a little bit and try and keep him from helping his bucket overflow. And that mutual commitment is very powerful, because what you want to do is set an upward spiral of confidence and resilience, not a downward spiral. So even though I may be overflowing with fear, I look over at my friend Bart's worse in that moment, I need to try and support him. I go, hey, I know it's scary, but hey, we've been through stuff like this before, we will get through this one. And even if it's just a little bit of propping up emotionally like that, it can help someone calm down, because I can't let my bucket overflow and his and the whole team and our leader. So you try and support the team by lifting each other up, and I think that starts an upward spiral of resilience back in myself. It's kind of like you lift me, I lift you, and we're raising each other up a little bit at a time.
I'm glad you put it that way. We're talking about resilience, reminding everybody in our audience today, we're talking with Jim Davidson, the author of The Next Everest, a climb to the summit in 2015, when in April of that year, there was one of the largest natural disasters that area had ever seen. And interestingly enough, Jim and his team were literally in the middle of it, because the avalanche and the cascades of the earthquake energy was on either side of you. And fortunately, it didn't overwhelm you, but that wasn't the case for a lot of people on that mountain at that time. A lot of lives were lost that were in the front of all of that snow coming down, of those thousands of feet of snow shelves that hit, and yet you were fortunate enough to be in the middle of it, giving you the opportunity, once it all settled down, to seek the goal of getting to the top, getting to the summit of Everest. So, Jim, with that scenario that you've now come away from and written this wonderful book about, but you've had over 30 years of climbing experience, what has been the most mentally and or physically challenging moment you've ever faced?
Well, there's a few over all the years. I've been on dozens of high altitude expeditions, and there's little ones that pop up here and there. I would say that physically the most difficult one I faced was when I had to, back on a different climb back in 1992. I was 29 at the time, and ice climbing a difficult route on Mount Rainier in the state of Washington with my good friend Mike. and we climbed a very difficult route over 4.5 days. We're coming down the easier route, and we knew there were cracks in the ice called crevasses that you mentioned earlier, and sometimes those crevasses are open cracks, and you just see them and avoid them. But in this case, the crevasse was hidden by a layer of snow, a bridge made out of snow that was spanning across the crevasse and hiding it. Well, when I stepped onto that pile of snow that looked like all the other pile of snows, it collapsed and dropped me into the crevasse, and because I was tied to my partner Mike with our climbing rope, it dragged him in too, and together the two of us plummeted 80 feet down inside that crevasse. Sadly, my partner Mike got some serious injuries, and I tried to give him CPR down there, and I couldn't bring him back due to the severe nature of his fatality, of his injuries that caused his death. And I was trapped down in there, and I had to somehow figure out a way to climb these vertical ice walls and even overhanging ice walls by myself, which was a level of climbing I'd never done in my life. It was way beyond what I could do. And I eventually figured out a way to start engaging with the challenge, but it was a 5-hour grind up this vertical and overhanging ice wall, no food, no water, with a lot of difficulties, and it just drained me right to my core. And of course I had the worst psychological burden as well, which was the loss of my friend, the survivor guilt that goes with that, and the belief that since he was a better climber, if this accident killed him, it was probably going to kill me too. So there was a lot of physical challenges and a lot of mental challenges at the same time.
So one of the things you mentioned was the loss of Mike, a fellow climber and a friend, but one of the things you had to face was cutting loose and leaving him there.
Yeah. Mike and I have been climbing partners and friends for 6 years, and certainly climbers have an oath to each other. We don't leave each other behind. I didn't cut him loose and go off the mountain per se, but I could not bring him up with me at the time. I had such great difficulties climbing this vertical and overhanging ice wall. But I anchored him into the bottom ice screw, which also anchored my rope. So we were still connected together, and if my system works, I'll be able to haul Mike up later. And if it doesn't work, and I fall and fail, Mike is going to, even though he's passed away, he and I are still tied together. So yeah, but I did have to leave him, which was very difficult. I'm happy to report that I managed to get out of that crevasse after some great difficulties. I contacted the rangers, and we went back and got Mike out of the crevasse. So I was able to get him off the mountain. But the process of temporarily cutting the rope between us and separating from him was very difficult. But I had to realize that if I didn't get us out, neither one of us was going to get out. So I talked to Mike before he left, even though I knew he was passed away, and I said, hey, I'm not supposed to leave you, but I got to get help. I can't get you out of here by myself. So I promise you I'll come back. And so I tried to see the long-term commitment of my partner, that I was going to get us out for now, and then I would make sure that he got out later. So even though he was gone, that's still that long-term commitment was an uplifting driving force for me during those moments of scariness and difficulty.
I'm glad you said it that way, Jim, because in any competitive endeavor, be it a sport, a team sport, or an individual sport, especially in this year of challenges with the Olympics, they're still calling them the 2020 Olympics, even though they're a year delayed. There's always those set of rules that, because of the experience, because of the sport itself or the challenge that the sports present, there's always these unwritten rules. So they permeate with climbers. I mean, your Sherpas know these rules. All the climbers that come in know these rules. So what do you do to educate the new climber, that arrogant, extremely athletic individual that says, I can climb Everest, I've got enough money to make this happen, I'm just going to come in and just make it happen, right? But there's some comeuppance that I'm sure that go along with that individual, with those seasoned climbers, especially climbers like yourself that have had the experience that came with 1992. How do you share those experiences to give them the understanding, the depth of understanding, and the appreciation for the environment that they need to have?
Yeah, I think it goes from several different channels, and all of them are necessary. Number one is to climb with people or play sports with people who have more experience than you. The veterans pass on the lessons to the younger people. That sort of first-hand mentoring is important.
Yeah.
And I do that by helping to lead college students on expeditions, and I used to teach rock climbing in my kids' elementary school. And I'll tell you, managing 500 kids and 20 volunteer parents on a climbing wall, that was some of the scariest climbing I ever did. I was running around nervous as heck. But that first-hand mentoring is important. Also reading books and magazines and listening to podcasts and watching movies. I believe every one of those episodes and chapters and articles has a lesson in there that you can take with you to be more successful, or in the case of dangerous sports like mountain climb, more safe. And so that's why that terrible situation I described with my partner Mike Price, I was really driven to write about it and get it down, to pass it on to other climbers, And that's why I wrote this book called The Ledge with my writing partner, Kevin Vaughn. I wanted to put the lesson down so that someday when I'm gone, somebody might read it. It'll help them overcome their challenges in the mountains. So it's mentoring, it's reading in your area of interest. It's also taking every class you can, every camp you can, and being well trained yourself. First aid, avalanche awareness, vertical rescue, evacuation, all that stuff. That's all part of passing on the lessons, learn all you can and passing it on. When you get to my point, when you get a few gray hairs and a little bit more in the beard, passing on becomes even more important. You think, wow, I've got 39 years of client experience. I need to write it down. I need to be a public speaker, and that's what I do now. I'm a public speaker sharing these adventures and, more importantly, the lessons at conferences to pass it on to others, both climbers and non-climbers, so that they'll be more fit mentally and physically to face their challenges when the time comes.
Jim, you do a great job of giving us a segue into letting people know what's the best way to get a hold of Jim Davidson.
Thanks. You can find me at my webpage, www.speakingofadventure.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter under either Climber Jim or Resilience with Climber Jim, because that's what I speak about a lot in my speaking is resilience. So speakingofadventure.com will take you, it'll trickle down from there to the books I've written and the speaking I do.
Well, and Jim has mentioned our theme for today. It's about climbing in the book, The Next Everest, but more importantly, it's about resiliency and the components that go into identifying those moments when you need to call upon yourself at the deepest levels to understand what's the next step for me, what's the next action I'm going to take within considering those steps and that vision towards responding appropriately in the moments that I'm challenged, which are the defining moments of your resiliency. You know, in resiliency, I use the character from Pillsbury, the Pillsbury Doughboy. When you poke the Pillsbury Doughboy, how fast do they respond back? And that's resiliency. It's you're being pushed by something or someone, and how fast do you respond back to that stimulus? Well, in the mountains, you're not given a lot of luxury of time in responding. It's either do or be consumed. And you've had a number of examples of doing and not being consumed, Jim. So congratulations to you for that. And your family is probably well blessed for those opportunities that you responded appropriately. But we've got an Olympic year here, and in this Olympic year, we've got some events that aren't all that well understood because they're new. The climbing events, the free climbing events that are now in the Olympics. So, Jim, I want to put you into a scenario. If you're an Olympic climbing coach, what do you say to your athletes before they start their first event?
Yeah, you've been training really hard. You know how to make the moves. You're fit. We all know that. That's a given. That's what it took to get here. And now we're here, and there's going to be new unknowns. How are we going to deal with COVID? What are the other teams going to do? Are they going to change the safety protocols or the rules? Or are they going to wind up sending us all home? We can't control those factors. And how we're going to deal with those is by drawing on previous tough experiences and bringing that resilience to bear. We've all had climbing situations where you get caught out overnight, where you had a sprained ankle, or it rained, or maybe all three at once. You were walking out with a sprained ankle and it started to rain and you didn't make it out until sunrise. Those kind of tough moments, they were difficult, sometimes even traumatic, and from that trauma we can grow. So we all know that trauma can happen. We can have post-traumatic stress disorder. That's a very real and a very serious thing. But over time, we can distill lessons, wisdom, strength from those difficult circumstances, and that's post-traumatic growth. And so today we're going to be able to apply the benefits of post-traumatic growth we've gotten from previous tough situations we've gone through. And so we'll be able to get through this tough situation as well.
Now, Jimmy,
there's my impromptu.
No, those are good things to tie on, and I'm going to expand on it a little bit more. You know, in your world at high altitude climbing with ice and snow and the elements, you've got the oxygen deprivation situation, so you can't go very fast. But in the Olympics, they have an event where it's this fast climb thing. So you start at the bottom and it's the fastest person up the thing, and everybody's on the same everybody's on the same route. Okay, right. So speed climbing is going to require breathing at a good altitude where you can actually have some oxygen being drawn in. What do you say to that athlete speed climbing, and you've got handholds, the rope, and that's it. Get up there as fast as you can. What do you say to them?
Well, to some degree I have no idea, because I watched them climb those 50-foot walls in like 7 and 8 seconds, and it takes me 8 minutes to tie my shoes on, and they're climbing the wall in 8 seconds. So to some degree, a little bit out of my box there, but I guess I would say this. Trust your instincts, don't think, do.
Yeah.
Because they've done those laps so many times, and they've got all those little patterns built into their fingers and their brains and their nervous system. Don't think about it all, just go. And their brain and their fingers will know what to do. But how they climb that fast, I'm not quite sure myself.
I'm going to echo that sentiment and reference one of my athletes is at the CrossFit Games. He's in the men's 40 and up category. He's coming back after an absence of being a competitor in the CrossFit. He has his own CrossFit gym here in the Denver metro area up in Louisville. And Dan Fink is his name. And one of the things Dan and I talked about is be in the space and visualizing the space you're in. And he looks at me and goes, what are you talking about, the whole arena? What are you talking about? I said, no, your space. So you're over a bar for deadlifting, or you're on a bike, or you're going to jump into a body of water. You define a space. Define that space. Get the vision of that space, so nothing outside of the space of the length of the bar and the width of the weight circles that are on that bar, that defines your space. And you will then define your performance within that space. So as he and I were practicing a few weeks ago on a deadlift, without him even thinking it through, he was so into his space and the breathing to lift, to make the lifts, he actually got to his max lift and repped out his max lift. And he went, oh my God. He looked down, he goes, that was my max lift, my max weight. I said, well, how'd you feel? He said, well, I did it. And I did it through the reps. I did 3 reps of it, but typically I'm doing a 1 set. He said, you see how powerful the mind is when you're in the space? So with that example, Jim, when you're on Everest and you're facing what you faced at base camp on that April day, what was the definition of your space? What did you experience in that space?
Yeah, I can almost see the space as a bubble, as you were describing that amazing story with your weightlifting client. I can almost see it now as I look back that when the avalanches were pouring towards us and I was trying to get my avalanche beacon on, my space was probably about 5 feet wide as I was trying to get my beacon on before the snow came through the wall of the tent. When I get outside and I could see some of my teammates, that bubble kind of widened to include them. And when the avalanche and earthquake stopped about 15 minutes later, by the time we regrouped outside, our space expanded to include our neighbors of different expeditions from different countries and languages to see if they were okay. Did they need anything from us? And by the end of that day, even just that afternoon, about 3 or 4 hours later, our space had expanded as far as base camp, which we couldn't see and we couldn't get to either because our ropes back down the mountain and the ladders we needed to cross over those big cracks called crevasses had been wiped out. But mentally, my space had reached as far as base camp because we were concerned about the massive medical problems that they were experiencing down there. They had a different avalanche, not just snow and ice like we had, but rocks, lots and lots of rocks. And that's where, sadly, 70 people got wounded and 18 people died, making it the deadliest day on Everest. So your space is definitely defined by your vision and mentality and what you have to account for. What was happening beyond my tent, at first, I couldn't know and I couldn't imagine, but as I knew that I was okay, my tent mate was okay, my team was okay, our bubble, or my bubble, was able to expand and account for teams of people I don't even know, people in base camp that I can't even get to. How can I support them over the radio or use my satellite system to help get them some help? So it is controllable, and then you have to work within the space that you've defined as best you can, and everything outside the space almost doesn't exist during those brief periods of time.
Jim, how relevant to your survival was your definition of that space?
Absolutely critical. When I first was writing chapters of the next Everest, and I was describing the avalanches coming down, and I took a few dangerous seconds to put my avalanche beacon on, and I put it on me. So if I get buried, maybe my teammates can dig me out, but if I get buried under house-sized blocks of ice that weigh millions of tons, it's not going to help. But it will still help the rescuers who may come for us later because they'll be able to find my body faster, which will help keep them safe. And it's better for my family if they find my body on the mountain and get it off the mountain than my family having to bear the weight of Jim's buried on the mountain somewhere we don't know where. So, I had to define my space and work within it for sure. And when it changes, that was due to my willingness to take on the next level out. But what's beyond that right now, I can't think about it. It was literally compartmentalized away. And some of my writing friends who weren't aware of this, they said, gosh, it sounds like you're a callous guy. You're not thinking about your family at all, your wife and your kids. You've been married to the same lady for 30 years. You have 2 teenage children. I said, I realized that in those few seconds, my best thing to do for them was to help me survive the avalanche. And if I think a whole lot about what they'll feel when I get buried or how they're going to get through the next decades without me, that would emotionally overwhelm me. So I intentionally compartmentalized that. I said, of course I love my wife and kids, and I want to get back to them, but in this moment, I need to just worry about getting my avalanche beacon on and staying on top of the avalanching snow. So you've got to push away everything that's not inside your space.
So it sounds like you actually prepared yourself to define the space in the moment by talking to your family before you even got to the mountain. So take me through that discussion, in that those uncomfortable moments sitting at home around the dining room table, and in your own mind you're thinking, okay, how am I going to tell her? What's the words I'm going to use to ask her about my desire to go to Everest and getting prepared for that? So take me through that space and the definition of that space for you in having that discussion with your wife.
Yeah, an early chapter in the book, The Next Everest, I described that scene in the kitchen. I'm sure you're referring to, with my wife Gloria, and at that point we've been married about 28 years or so, and I was nervous to ask her. I was downright scared to ask her. Now she knew that climbing is my #1 passion. I don't do almost every other hobby you can name. I don't do them at all. I put all my time and energies into my spare hobby. I'm either working with my family or working on my one and only hobby, climbing. So she knew it was important to me, and it causes a little bit of difficulty for her and the kids, a little tension sometimes. But we've been married for 28 years at that point. So I was nervous, but we had an open conversation about it. And she was a little chagrined, like, you want to do another expedition, and this one's Everest. The stakes, the risk, the uncertainty, the death rate for those that go are all on a maximum compared to anything I'd ever done before. So again, I just have to be present and aware of what's she thinking, what are her concerns, the kids' concerns, my responsibility as a dad, and how am I going to manage those risks, because I take those responsibilities with me to Everest. I mean, I've got to do a good job on the mountain so I can come back and resume those responsibilities when I get back. So it's not easy emotionally for me or for her, but you've got to just be perfectly honest about yourself and with your significant other. I was saying, hey, come on, boy, I've been doing this for 30 years, 32 years at that point. I know what I'm doing. I'm getting older. It's not going to get any easier. You know how important this is to me. And she's like, yeah, Jim, but it's Everest. You can't control all the principles. She's a smart enough climber to know that avalanches, no one was thinking earthquakes then, but avalanches, crevasses, illness, rockfall, icefall, human falls, all those things are a factor. And so, I have to be honest with myself and her and say, no, you're right. I can't control all those. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to go with a smart team. I'm going to train like I've never trained before, and I'm going to do everything I can, equipment-wise and team-wise, to optimize it, but I can't control the last 1-2% of the risk. So I think that's part of it, is just being perfectly honest with yourself and your partner in that space, because the stakes are so high, there's no lying to yourself or to your partner. And sometimes we forget things, and good partners and friends will call you on that and go, hey, Jim, that sounds good, but you talked about running. You're not that great a runner. What are you going to do about that? I guess, yeah, I have to address that. So that's where you want good teammates, both in life and on your climbing team and your sports team, is that they will back you up when they need to and call you on stuff when they need to.
So Jim, the conversations with Gloria, how important were they in allowing you to be responsive to the demands that nature presented itself to you on that April day on Everest?
They are found squaring things away with your teammates, whether that's your family or your sports team, your climbing team, are foundational to anything that's going to happen. It has to be there. For instance, if we had a big spat and I ran off to the mountain anyways because my ego said I wanted to climb Mount Everest, if I got to the mountain, what kind of a headspace am I going to be in? What are my conversations with her going to be over the sat phone? How is she going to feel? Being upset for 2 months and maybe really mad when I come back. How's that reunion going to go when I get home? I know somebody that went on an expedition to the Himalayas like that. They're in a bad fiscal spot. They're in a bad relationship spot. He went anyways. He went on the climb, and when it came time to make the summit push, he just ran out of mental gas. He not only didn't make the summit push, he left base camp and kind of fled for two or 3 days, then came back and then went home. So he kind of blew everything. He blew the climb, relationship, business things, money-wise. And so if you don't have a good relationship foundation going into these challenging situations, it is going to mess you up and haunt you every way. So you've got to get that squared away. That's part of having all your systems in place and backed up. Good training, good equipment, good partnership, good relationships. And even if there's some trouble in those, you've got to manage it and be honest about it, or you'll never be able to focus during the Olympics, during the finals, during the summit push.
So let's make sure the audience knows that many of the members of your climbing team on Everest, you knew them from various experiences, or you knew their reputation,
Right.
and you trusted it. But there are also relationships that you're going to create when you get there. And in most cases, it's support team people. It's Sherpas, it's cooks, it's people that are at the base camp. So how does your historical relationships with others and the relationship established with family and preparing them for this climb give you skill sets to quickly establish trusting relationships with support teams and Sherpas? Now, I understand that you've climbed enough that you know some Sherpas, and we're grateful that some of those people were on your team at Everest. But I want to make sure that our audience understands that a relationship I build today is also the components of the foundations I will build with others in the future. How is that beneficial to you?
Yeah, it comes down to professional commitments and reputation, because I did know some of my fellow climbers and fellow guides and fellow Sherpa guides, but not all of them, and I certainly didn't know very many of the cook's assistants and the cooks and the yak herders and the helicopter pilots and the iceball doctors that install the ice and ropes. I didn't know them at all, and to some degree, I never even caught the names of all those people, nor did they catch my name. So that comes down to a professional reputation, which is by picking a guide company that I knew had those relationships, I'm trusting their professionals, and they will only deal with professionals. It's like on a sports team, it's not like everyone's going to be a great player, but they're going to pick a really, really bad team doctor. They're not going to do that. And so to some degree, you have to trust each other's judgment that if you're acting professional and they're acting professional, the people they affiliate with and associate with will be as well. And that also means sometimes you have to make tough decisions, which is if you're the head coach or the owner of a team and the team doctor was not up to snuff, you have to fire that person, because if they're not doing their job, that's going to let down everybody else on the team. So as an individual, you try to live up to your professional obligations and your reputation, trust that everybody else will too. That's what makes a magical, safe, and successful team. And if somebody's not doing their job, sometimes you have to counsel them off the team, or ask them to stay in base camp, or ask them to quit their job, because you've got an obligation to all these other people in the team who are doing their job.
In any team setting, there's always a chance for misunderstandings through communication. But in your team setup, many times you don't physically see the team member. There's nonverbals. There is misunderstandings within those nonverbals. And in some cases, the nonverbal is as subtle as a tug on a rope, or the feeling of balance or lack of balance because of, I can't see the ice in front of me because there's snow flailing around me. So there's a level of trust that is innate, intuitive. So what do you do in your brain when you feel this misunderstanding, this lack of communication, and yet it's in a set of surroundings, environmental stimuluses that are pretty scary? Like you're clipped to a rope, and all you can feel or see is the feeling. You don't see anything but white. What's your brain do with that, Jim?
Well, that's where the depth of trust in your partners and your team, and also the depth of your commitments to the safety and success come in. And you have to be, again, 100% honest with yourself and your teammates. If you and I are attached to a couple of ice screws on a mountain, and we've got 200 feet to go, if I look at you and say, Lowell, I'm pretty sure I can leave this section safely without a fall, but I need you to pay complete attention to the rope when I'm gone. Do not pull me off the crux of this climb. You've got to watch that rope. I'm going to listen. I'm going to watch your eyes. I'm going to see your physical gestures. And what I'm hoping to see back is to you look me right in the eyes and go, Jim, I'm 100% behind you. I trust you can lead this. I will not let you down on this belay. That lifts me up. And my commitment to making that the last lead lifts you up. You say, well, I'm scared. I don't know if Jim can do this, but I know he's fully committed. And that's that lifting each other up process. And that's where 1 and 1 add up to more than 2. And that's what you want in good partners in life, in sports, and on climbing, is to not only have those partners, but to be that partner. And that's something I put in the book in the next Everest is, when you want to do something big, I think there's power in picking a goal big enough that makes you scared, that makes you nervous, because you go, I don't know if I'm strong enough to climb Everest. I don't know if I'm fast enough to make it through the ice fall and then get up to the summit and get back down before the sun goes down. That nervousness is good. It tells you you've picked a big goal, and now your job is to grow into somebody big enough that can reach that goal. And that's how picking the big goals turns you into a better version of you. And if you and your partner are both doing that, 1 + 1 can add up to a lot more than 2.
In the recent days, we've experienced in this country domestically the NBA Finals. Milwaukee Bucks winning 4 games in a row after being down 2-0 to come back. They transitioned well. They saw challenges, but they transitioned well through those challenges. We've got the Olympics, which in itself is a challenge since it's being called the 2020 Olympics in 2021. So there have been challenges throughout the months that we've experienced in the past, the last year to 18 months with a global pandemic. So I want to ask about transitions, Jim, because the summit is it, right? But then when you get there and you relish the moment in the sunshine of Everest, which typically is a great experience, seeing the sun and the great clouds at an amazing altitude of 20,000 plus feet, and the lack of oxygen that causes your brain to kind of experience it in a very interesting way. But you've got the transition of coming down. There's still threats, there's still challenges coming down off the mountain after that euphoria. What are the thoughts that go through your mind on that? I mean, oh, I got here. Oh my God, I got to go back down?
Right. Yeah, I spent 61 days getting myself to Nepal, going up and down the mountain for practice, and reaching the summit. And then I had to come down in about 24 hours.
Yeah.
But in fact, the risk in those 24 hours was some of the greatest of the whole trip, because all the environmental factors are working against me now, and the psychological ones. I met my goals, so maybe I'm not paying attention. My body is physically drained. On the summit push, I was awake for 36 hours, and I was physically moving for 24 of those 36 hours. So I think about, my marathon time taking a long time, or, it's 3 hours at the gym. That's nothing compared to what's going on in the summit push. So I'm exhausted. Also, physically, we're going downhill. If you trip when you're going downhill, you land on your face down below your feet, so you fall even further just from a physical standpoint. All of those things are working against you. So I remind myself, and when I help lead college students on expeditions, when we get to the top, I let the group have a 15-minute yay, and we take our summit photos and roll up our flags and hugs and high five and everything. And then I go, all right, we're leaving in 5 minutes. Everyone start putting your game face on. We put our backs on everything, we gather up, and I say, we made the summit, congratulations. The easy half is behind us. Now comes the hard half. Because if we don't pay attention on the way down, something goes wrong, everything we've accomplished is going to mean absolutely nothing. And that's reminded to me and to them. So yeah, you have to realize that the game is not over. It'd be like being 5 minutes left in the 4th quarter, and you go, hey, we're up by 3 points. Let's all high five and drink champagne. No, the game is not over yet. So paying attention to those transitions and getting off the mountain, seeing the game down until the clock runs out 0-0, or until your kid is graduated and you're back home with your spouse. Those, it ain't over till it's over, is the old saying. That's very, very true. And the vets know you've got to keep an eye on that clock and an eye on that slope until you get all the way down.
Well, the one thing about mountain climbing, especially at the altitudes you've experienced with Everest and at Rainier and others, is coming down. The transition is now filled with the realities of lack of food, fatigue, and hydration. I mean, one thing, the obvious is the oxygen deprivation. I mean, that's an obvious thing. But the feeling of the fatigue from that oxygen deprivation, the fact that you're probably at the end or exhausted your food supply if it wasn't managed well, or somebody got a little greedy on the way up and took more than they should have because their discipline wasn't there, and then the water content. So now you're going, well, and I've had people ask me this, well, what about just eating the snow? No, no. There are certain rules and there's certain guidelines. So talk to me about the lack of the obvious, but now you have to realize it in the transition. Oh my God, I don't have the food, I don't have the water, or I have to ration it to get myself down in a certain amount of time.
Yeah, by reading a lot of books, talking to other veteran Everest climbers, and working my way up slowly literally over 3 decades, I knew that would happen on the summit push. Nobody knows exactly, but we think on our summit push that we burn between 10,000 calories and 12,000 calories. That's about the same as running 4 marathons. And if you really push yourself and you're really diligent, you might get 1,200 calories, maybe 1,000 calories down your throat in that same time period. So you're going to run a 9 to 11,000 calorie deficit. We just can't carry the food. You can't stomach it because there's so little oxygen. There's 70% less oxygen up there that your body does not want to eat. Like I could say, boy, I'm hungry, and you give me a plate of food at 26,000 feet, I will probably take about 300, 400, 500 calories and go, oh, I just feel like I ate Thanksgiving dinner. I can't take another bite, because your body senses it's going to take oxygen and energy to digest this. Just stop. Just please stop. I'm going to tell you that you're full. So you have to force food and water before you go without food and water on the way down. I knew that was going to happen, so surprise, surprise, I trained for it. I did deprivation training. Before I went, in the wintertime, on the coldest nights, I would look for the coldest night of the year and the coldest hour of that night, usually around 2 o'clock in the morning, and I would wake up at my house with insufficient sleep, maybe 3-4 hours sleep. I would get up, and I would not drink any water or eat any food, and I would put on my gear and my down suit and my high-altitude boots, and I'd go up to my local training hill and carry 60 pounds of ropes that I didn't need to the top of my local training hill. And I called it deprivation training. And what I was doing was getting my body, and more importantly my mind, used to the fact you're tired, you haven't slept enough, you're dehydrated, and you know what? There's work to do. And I think that built my psychology up before I went, and also when the time came and I was descending and I was going into hour 30, 32, 34, and I was almost drunk with exhaustion, I knew that my cellular memory, my instincts, my hands would do the right thing, clipping in and out of the ropes and tying my knots that I needed to do, because I had sort of trained for even that deprivation time.
I like that you shared that, because it reminds me of how art represents reality. And Clint Eastwood made a movie about Everest, and he did deprivation training as part of the movie and going through it, and how painful that was for him to do that, but beneficial in the endings of the movie. Now, as we get close to the endings of this very brief movie, I want to remind everybody that you listen to KUHS Denver every Friday with me at 11 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, and we stream all over the world. So I hope that the audience that we have today is taking advantage of listening to the concepts of resiliency as reflected in the trip up a mountain, literally a trip up a mountain that had more than its fair share of tests that are normally there for going up a mountain to the 20,000 foot levels and higher. When you add an avalanche and an earthquake, you will be able to capture the story in the next Everest in the book written by Jim Davidson. I'm so grateful to call you a friend, Jim, and I have had met you 5 to 8 years ago when we met at CSU talking to a bunch of football players that I'm hoping that they understood the realities of your Mount Rainier climb, and now I'm hoping that they're listening and can take advantage of your newest book, The Next Everest. My props go out to Gloria and the family. They're as resilient as anybody on the planet when it comes to hanging out with you. Jim, share with our audience what you would like them to take away. What's your takeaway for them from today's conversation?
Well, looking back over the last year and a half, I mean, it's been a tough year and a half for everybody in every way. We've faced difficulties, challenges, uncertainty, and trauma in our personal lives, in our physical lives, and our work lives. These things are not easy. They're not fun. We want them to go away as fast as they can. But during the difficult times, which includes now until we get COVID completely under control, we have to do the necessary things to take care of ourselves and others. And when we come out of this, we're going to look back and go, wow, that was awful. But we did learn some things. We can do things better than we did before. Because some people might think when you go through something difficult, like an earthquake or personal trauma or a pandemic, that we just want things to go back the way they were. Just go back the way they were. They're not going to go back quite the way they were. We've all been changed, and so we have to ask ourselves, what can I take away from this that will make me more resilient for the next challenge, the next opportunity, the next Everest ahead? And that's post-traumatic growth, and that's how you refine yourself into a better version of you for that next challenge, for that next opportunity, and that's how you make your community more resilient. That's the thing to take away from the difficult times, is those lessons that can make you and your community stronger for those next set of challenges ahead.
Thanks, Jim. I really appreciate your words. Stick with me after I close off the show, and I'll say a proper goodbye and a thank you to you. Hey, everybody, every Friday, 11 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, listen to 360 Performance here, streaming on KUHSdenver.com. Have a great day, everyone.